Welcome to New York Truck Stop Video, this voice of small business in New York, presented by NewYorkTruckStop.com and the Law Office of Arthur Miller. I'm Zach Miller.
And I'm Arthur Miller. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. So last week on our radio show, New York Truck Stop Radio, Saturdays at 1 on AM 970, The Answer, and AM 570, The Mission, Arthur and I had our friend and neighbor, Tim Ducey, on. Now, Tim owns two bar and restaurants in our area in Forest Hills, Queens. So we had him on to talk about his experience going through, what's it like to run a restaurant, to run a bar during the COVID-19 pandemic. And he, went over in great detail what that entails. I highly suggest you listen to that. But one of the things that we discussed with him was, what about outdoor dining? Because there's a big push around the country, and certainly here in New York City and state, to allow restaurants and customers the ability to sit outdoors and eat and drink, and it makes sense because you say in the era of social distancing, let's give people more space, more outdoor space. We don't want to cram people inside. Just today, we're recording this on June 3rd. Just today, Governor Cuomo announced that outdoor dining for restaurants will be included in phase 2 of reopening, whereas indoor dining is phase 3. So the assumption was that restaurants would not be allowed to fully reopen until phase 3. Now he's saying, no, it's phase 2 as long as it's outdoors. Also, this week, the New York City Council is planning to vote on a bill to allow outdoor seating, but it's more of a street closure type bill, and we'll get into that today. But that was really one of the points that Tim made, was that this is not, it's fine, like it'll help some people, but it's really not a one size fits all. There are a lot of problems with it. There are a lot of problems even for someone like him who operates in commercial corridors. It's frustrating where the best, we're talking about 3 months of shutdowns. We're talking about 3 months of how do we get business back up and running. The best they could come up with is, let's close streets to allow more outdoor dining. So that's sort of the intro, I guess. That's what's been going on. And so we thought we would talk about some of the issues with the outdoor dining and some other things that cities and states and municipalities should be doing to provide for restaurants.
Let me just
go ahead.
And we give Speaker Corey Johnson and the City Council a lot of credit, and of course, the many advocates for the hospitality industry. I forget his first name, Riggy, Mr. Riggy, for one.
Andrew, I think.
Andrew Riggy of the Hospitality Alliance and others. But we looked at the bill, intro 1957, and there is a hearing scheduled for tomorrow, the 4th of June. And the bill seems to me, to both of us, we talked about it, a little bit overly complicated and difficult, burdensome for a lot of restaurants and bars to comply with. That we'll get into that, and we'll tell you why. But as Zach said, clearly it's not one size fits all. Yeah. And we'll get into some of the details and some of the things that we think the City Council and others have to consider. But we think there were also some other ideas that might help, because again, not all restaurants are the same, not all small businesses are the same, not every neighborhood and not every street is the same. So, I think there are a lot of things to consider. So, go ahead.
Well, so I would say let's sort of do a rundown about some of the issues with the bill, I would say, or some of the things that they don't consider. And I think the first one, which Tim mentioned a lot of, is the liability issue. Because...
Right. Actually, let's put that aside for a second. When I said overly broad, the basic concept is this, is that the city, New York City DOT in consultation with community boards and bids and others, will identify some areas that may be okay for partial street closure so that restaurants could expand. And then in that case, expand outdoor dining. And
Right.
then once that's done, there has to be the Department of Consumer Affairs will have an application process. Also, the Department of Health has to establish some guidelines as to how these restaurants should operate. And then, as part of the application process, that the restaurant owner is going to need to submit some kind of plan that's certified by a licensed engineer or architect, and as to what that's going to do. And of course, a number of these groups are envisioning, and I think the Hospitality Alliance had a link to some firms' possible design for some areas with pretty looking outdoor areas that are fenced in with barricades and things like that, and maybe leaving the equivalent of one lane for traffic open for pedestrians and cyclists, which is another thing that we'll talk about also. But it sort of looks like a grand. Oh, and all of this is only to last through the end of October. So again, it's a temporary thing. So, but it seems complicated to for the average restaurant owner to provide, and it also seems complicated in that not every street is made up of only restaurant establishments. So you may have a restaurant next to a liquor store, next to a package store, next to a hair salon, next to a stationery store.
I mean, that's basically Austin Street right there that you just described.
I was going right down the list.
I mean, that's literally how Austin Street is set up.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
That was one of the things the bill said, is that they could also identify other areas where maybe there's a plaza in another building, or
an empty lot,
or let's say there's an empty store or commercial ground floor space, street level space next to you, and that maybe you'd be able to expand a little bit in front of that. And that's where Tim was saying when we talked that there's no discussion of the liability question too. So just because DOT and the community boards and others may identify some areas, there's a huge question of liability and how that gets worked out. So let's say you have some tables on the street or the sidewalk. Pedestrians are diverted around that or are walking through. Somebody smashes into a waiter, or vice versa. A pedestrian is hit by a waiter carrying a tray or something. What happens? Who are they going to sue? Is the city responsible? Will insurance cover that? I think that's a problem for merchants, and certainly the notion of letting a restaurant expand to a parking lot next door. You think what private firm they're going to want to have insurance coverage in case there's a trip and fall or an altercation or something that's in the other party's property. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, and then that with the way that you said they're looking to design these spaces around other types of stores. You have the issues of delivery and trash pickup and things like that. How a delivery is going to happen, not just to the bars and restaurants, but how a delivery is going to happen to the other businesses around there. And then also, what about curbside? A lot of these restaurants have been able to keep themselves going with curbside takeout, and a lot of I've seen it with my own eyes. People getting really comfortable just pulling up to the curb, quickly grabbing their food and getting out of there. It's pretty quick turnover. There so far is a lot of parking that I've been seeing, but what happens if that goes away? Will the outdoor space be able to work, to make up for. I mean, like they're just a lot of unknowns. Again, no one's talking about how deliveries are going to happen. No one's talking about liability. No one's talking about what happens to your neighbors who are not in that field. And then, why are we as a city, when, our businesses, particularly our small and micro businesses and hospitality, have been devastated for the last 3 months, why are we looking to create a have and have not system? That seems especially cruel. I mean, even by New York City Council standards, particularly cruel. Where there are other options that really should be taken into account? Options like rent relief, options like, or at least a loan or grant program that allow
Right, to help struggling restaurants.
To help them for things for rent, instead of hiring back employees, which they will do once they're able to be back up and running. But you're not going to be back up and running if you get evicted, or if you're looking at such a huge rent debt sheet to your landlord. You just say, I'm done. It's stuff like that. And let's be honest, given the current climate, there does need to be access to first responders as well. Let's not forget about that right
Absolutely.
now.
And then you raise a good question. If a narrow street is made more narrow by prohibiting traffic, but leaving, let's say, the equivalent of one lane open for pedestrians and cyclists and delivery people, the throttle bikes and e-scooters and others, and still worrying about the other merchants on the block, that can be difficult. And again, as Zach was saying, not to have the haves and have-nots. How do you say to someone, well, this is all about saving the restaurant? Merchant who have a store, or you who have someone else, where especially you're talking about maybe people still have to wait to come in, or even the curbside of delivery of the product that's in your store as opposed to food. How do you say that the restaurant's business takes priority over your business, just as you're trying to reopen?
Yeah, it's almost impossible. It really is. It's one of those things. It's funny because when it was first announced, it was not like I was for or against it, but I was just like, oh, that's a decent enough idea.
Yeah, I said it was a wonderful idea.
I still like it. It's not like I don't like the idea. I just think that there are just too many variables that they're not considering that's going to make this problematic.
Right.
I really do. And it's still, and there's still the enforcement issue. There's still the enforcement issue about people social distancing, and open containers and stuff like that. Because right now you are having people sort of congregate outside of local bars, and they're having their to-go cups and they're drinking, and it's causing problems. There has been a lot of enforcement on that. 311 complaints. The state or the city could come in and they could write massive fines. They could pull your liquor license. I know there are 2 bar restaurants in Queens that had their liquor licenses temporarily suspended because of a lack of social distancing. It's a very, very difficult situation, and this is not exactly the solution to these problems.
Well, that's certainly the enforcement issue is one that's up in the air. So Zach, I'm glad you raised that, because certainly handling tickets and enforcement issues is what I do professionally. But also I see the issue of fines and enforcement are a big burden to not only to restaurants that are trying to reopen, but other industries as well. And I'd really like the city council to consider things like that. You've got restaurants that are looking at thousands of dollars in fines because there may have been a sign that was mounted outside their establishment maybe 30 years ago and several owners ago that may not have been properly legalized, and all of a sudden the building department's coming in, looking at them to, either remove the sign or get proper permits for it, and thousands of dollars of fines. You've got health department inspectors who, at least in the past, were walking around. They give out fines for something as like I'd say as minute as one fruit fly in a in a bottle, or things like that. So it's one thing to talk about wanting to help the restaurants, but I think restaurants and other industries in the city need to get a clear message from the city council that we're not going to be looking to enforcement to try to balance the city's budget, while at the same time saying we've got to go out there and help these businesses get back on their feet. You're talking about the tax base, and claiming that certain enforcement of tickets are just a cost of doing business. But if it's going to keep businesses from reopening, or chisel in a little too heavily while they're trying to restructure, that's not going to be the way to go.
Well, I think, one thing that was clear these last couple of months, not that people weren't sure, but I think it is clear that there really is just a complete lack of understanding about what businesses, particularly small and micro businesses, need to survive and to thrive by leadership in this city, in this state. And that's, that's very troubling, to say the least. But, there are some mechanisms that the city should look at that really might be able to help some of these businesses. I know you had an idea about maybe instead of trying to expand the outdoor cafe seating type of thing, maybe make it more like a film shoot type of process.
Yeah, I mean, that's what and for me, in exploring some neighborhoods and just sort of getting the lay of the land. I think rather than than what the city council's proposing. And by the way, what the city council's proposing is not a bad thing in some areas, but I don't think it will help enough. And what occurred to me is something like simple and organic. Why? Let's say like the mayor's motion picture office has clear guidelines about when you need a permit and what you need to do. There are also rules about unrelated to the film permit office. There are rules about vendors, where vendors can locate a cart. So both sort of depend on sort of the size of a sidewalk. And I see no reason why, let's say, one restaurateur, depending on maybe some basic guidelines or just even within the community, can't go to the local precinct or the community board and say, it would help us a lot if we could close off, if we could take, let's say, 3 parking spaces in front of our establishment during the hours of, between X and Y, each day or something like that. Can we take those and put in a couple of tables and chairs? Show that you have an insurance certificate or something like that. I think that could be pretty easy. So I don't think people would mind losing a couple of parking spaces on a temporary basis like that.
Even if they do, too bad.
I'm sorry?
I mean, even if people in the neighborhood complain about that, too bad. It's a fair compromise.
That's a fair compromise. Traffic could still get through. It's not permanent. You're not worried about the cost of expensive barriers and things like that. And deliveries could still be made. So, in other words, they'd have to work, in time with their suppliers. So saying, listen, if we're going to close off the area, let's say in front of our place between 11 and 8 or something, so we have to get any deliveries before then, and then that's the kind of thing that could work. And again, this would be something that could be worked out with the community board, the precinct, even the borough DOT office and that kind of thing. But it doesn't need to be a whole big production, and it can be flexible. You see how it works without a lot of expenditure of money on plans and certified licensed engineers and architects and things like that. So I think that would be a fairly simple solution. We'll post some pictures on the website, but I saw a couple of places where they seem to do that. There were just no cars. There was a busy bar in Williamsburg. I saw when I was riding my bike over the weekend, and there were a couple of spaces out, and there were some small tables and chairs. There was another place that just had room on the sidewalk, and they put out some little cafe tables, as long as there was room. And I think that kind of thing could work. And I think the restaurant owners, just like most small businesses, need flexibility, need a little humanity. We're trying to ease the way for them to come back, and we don't need it look like a real heavy-handed, difficult process that I hate to say only the well-heeled ones will be able to afford.
Right.
So, I think that's the problem. Zach, did you want to add to that about doing it easily? Because we had a list of some other issues that we think have to be addressed.
I mean, I think we actually covered a lot of the issues that they needed to address. To be honest with you, which is pretty cool. Although
we have our article posted on our website.
We do have the article on the website. I'll put the link in the description. But there is one issue that we probably should mention. It's a little uncomfortable, but it is the restroom situation, especially until phase 3 kicks in and people are not allowed in the establishments. How do people relieve themselves? I mean, there's no porta potty situation that's being discussed in any of this, or even like I don't think part of the bill says, oh, and you can go in just to use the restroom, one at a time, something like that. It's definitely something to consider, because as people are out and they're socializing and they're having a good time, they're going to need to use the bathroom, and you don't want them to do it in places where they shouldn't be doing it. And I can understand why the city council didn't really think about this, but they should, because it's a factor.
And also you have to worry about the enforcement angle. If all of a sudden people are congregating inside waiting for the bathroom, if
exactly.
They're allowed to go in and use the bathroom, then as the restaurant's open, we're supposed to have somebody standing there watching, monitoring their bathroom, as well as trying to serve customers. I think that's the problem. Then also we got the trash collection issue. So you got deliveries, yes, but you got to worry about the flexibility to get the trash trucks through.
Well, I guess that sort of does raise the question of, are we talking about like? I think this is what you sort of brought up before, where it's like, it's not so much, oh, let's like be able to put tables and chairs out on streets in front of these restaurants. It's like we're doing this like more intensive type of design thing, and it's like, well, hold on a second. So this is going to be semi-permanent. So then you're really not going to have space for deliveries or for curbside pickup or for trash. Like, where are we going to leave the trash exactly? It's definitely something that they did not consider.
Right. And that's, let's be honest here, and certainly not looking to, beat up on group, but, yet again, transportation advocates are getting behind this thing because they view it as a way to, on their objective of closing streets to cars, which in some instances can be nice. But if you're using this, saving the restaurants, as an excuse, there are so many things that have to be considered. And you don't want a sort of de facto closing of the street on a semi-permanent basis under the guise of just trying to help the restaurants, when there are so many other pieces of the puzzle. And like we said, what about the other merchants? What about deliveries? What about somebody who's moving in and out of an apartment upstairs?
Yeah.
Or what about the trash collection? What about
That's a really
the
good point.
pedestrians? What about the delivery? The delivery people. What if there's a restaurant establishment that has a better delivery operation? There are many sort of small spaces that was their primary business model in the first place, not outdoor seating. So they rely on delivery people with scooters and bikes and sometimes cars to come in and out, or people making pickups. So it's like, does their business not matter?
Yeah,
You know,
and it's interesting because I'm not going to name them, but I could tell you that there's more than one food establishment in Forest Hills, Queens, that has actually made more money the last couple of months with takeout, pretty much takeout and delivery than they had when they were fully operational. Um, Understand that that is the minority, that most businesses are in that industry are in lots of trouble. But still, the point is, there have been those who successfully were able to adapt to this new business model, and what and you're basically coming and telling them that you're going to help them, and they could be like, but no, you're not, you're actually going to hurt me. Not to mention, what's going to happen to all my neighbors who, you're redesigning the streets around them, and they don't really need that. So there's a lot to consider here,
right.
just outside of what do we need to do to help restaurants and bars. Which and
And
Yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead, go
and
ahead.
I was going to say, and another thing that seems to be sorely lacking is that yet again it seems to be um, giving more top-down authority from City Hall. You really need
Yeah,
to have outreach and have stakeholders within the community included. The way the bill is drafted, it just says in consultation, the DOT shall decide which areas would work in consultation with the community boards and the bid, if there is, or whatever. But you still need more, and you need a sort of outreach period, because the community boards are not elected, and neither are chambers of commerce or bids or things like that. And I think there really needs to be outreach, and outreach within the community. What does the community want for that particular area? Um, what does what do the merchants and other commercial establishments on that street want? What about parking? That's always an issue, and I don't just
yeah,
mean deliveries, but people who patronize these things. I mean, they have to consider some places get more of there's some ethnic areas, for example, they do a large business of people coming back to the old neighborhood. So if
yes,
they're cut off, that may be a little difficult for them to do. So
that's a
uh,
great
I,
point.
I think that's a problem as well. So if there's going to be spill out onto adjoining areas, so let's say they close a street, these are all things that have to be thought of. But I think it should be more organic and coming from within the
Hmm.
community, and then the city, meaning the DOT, and some of these other agencies can say, okay, we see, you followed certain guidelines, so we'll say yes or no, as opposed to them sort of first saying which areas we'll approve. I think we need to have the flexibility to let, and again, most of these restaurants and business, these are small businesses, so they need to be able to say what would work for them within some general guidelines, as opposed to what the city thinks should happen in a particular area.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and that's very well said. And then there's also, I mean, just lastly, um, there is a concern of just when are they going to let them open back up? Like, when are they going to, how long exactly does the city expect to keep these places closed? Because between the financial situation and the fact that people are clearly just frustrated and had it with being cooped up. Um, I don't think, and this is, just my opinion, I don't think the city could really keep these places closed for much longer. And I don't want to hear about any more half measures when the answer is you got to just be able to let them back in. And yes, it's going to be at reduced capacity, and yeah, you may have to mark up spaces on the floor where people have to stand, but at the end of the day, you got to let people back in. I mean, that's the answer, and they're tiptoeing around that, and it's very frustrating.
And let me just say this too, without um, especially right now when we're going through such huge um, unrest and concern about civil rights and as a result of police tactics and other things, I certainly don't want to downplay it, but we're going to be talking a good deal about it on some shows coming up this week. But what I wanted to say is that again, getting back to enforcement, social distancing, there has to be, we have to avoid the heavy-handed enforcement of that.
Absolutely.
And to that end, that certainly should not be the police's role to be enforcing social distancing, or the sheriff who comes in and looks like the police, dressed similarly and with badges. And I think what you need, and I've talked about this before, is maybe something the equivalent, like a block captain or a concierge or something, something where almost like glorified crossing guards, where somebody knows the area. Some people know the area. Let's say if you instead of traffic ticket agents who do work for the NYPD, you had traffic ticket agents who could sort of come by and say, we think it's a little crowded. We see how you've been operating. If please try. You got to enforce that. If we come around again, something maybe, we would do something about it. Either they call somebody or they write something up. But you need a sort of warning period. The idea is that we should all be watching and helping each other, not calling in the police, who have far better and more important things to do. And we don't want altercations with the police, because when you do have the police involved in enforcement, it's an opportunity for it expanding into something more serious. So, the police card should not be called on just sort of basic social distancing. If there's a problem with unruly patrons and things like that, then absolutely. But my idea of some sort of block captain or somebody just sort of walking to make sure that things are in order, people would know that person. That person would know what's normal for the particular businesses and could sort of say, hey, this doesn't look right. Let's fix it up a little. And I think it would go a long way to maintaining order without any heavy-handed enforcement, both monetarily and law enforcement.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
So, City Council, consider that too. We're going to work on a more formal proposal for that. But I think that would work. Heck, you could even put more people to work doing that.
I was thinking that as well. So yeah, I mean, really a lot for them to consider, a lot of moving parts here. But at the end of the day, we have to have something that works for these mom and pop shops in the commercial corridors all around the city.
Right. I mean, we're talking about rebuilding.
Yeah.
Rebuilding our city, rebuilding our business. Both physically and structurally, after all of the tumult, but after the economic disaster, and of course there's a lack of trust as well, and people are still not going to feel comfortable who's got a mask, we want to encourage places to open, and help them try to build their economy and build their business and of course employ people and help build the tax base and things like that. But we have to understand that it is a new world, and it's not going to just change overnight.
So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, any topic you want us to cover, give us a call, 718-997-0641. send an email, Zach, Z-A-C-H, at NewYorkTruckStop.com, Arthur at NewYorkTruckStop.com, and be sure to listen to us Saturdays at 1 p.m. on AM 970 The Answer and AM 570 The Mission. Stay safe out there.